Hello, and welcome to Peak Performance Radio. I am the host, John Seville, and I am honored to be speaking with Paul Zientarski, the originator of a program called Learning Readiness PE in Naperville, Illinois. Paul has really led the way and been an innovator in a new approach to physical education at the school level, beginning, I'll let Paul tell, but from my experience back in the late 1990s and early 2000s when there was a new approach to physical education in response to the childhood obesity crisis. Since then, Paul has taken the concept of physical education and the strategic application of physical education and used it as a way to deliver kids who are more ready to learn. It's a very exciting program. It's innovative, and with all the emphasis being placed on academic performance now, it's an important role for physical education to play in this process. So, Paul, welcome to the show. And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about where you started with LRPE, or Learning Readiness PE, and how did that whole thing evolve, really?
Well, thanks, John, for getting in touch with me and having me an opportunity to talk to your listeners. The concept of learning PE goes back to 2003. And that's when a Harvard researcher by the name of John Rady came to visit our phys ed program. Kind of started talking to me and the gentleman that I was affiliated with at the time, Phil Lawler, about how exercise affects the brain. And it was the first time I had ever heard a neuroscientist even talk about the value of exercise in the brain. And one of the first things that caught my attention in our conversation was he talked about something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what John told us at the time was that that particular factor is what created new brain cells in our brain, and it was only a result of exercise. That's when we develop new brain cells. It's only as a result of exercise. And obviously, as a phys ed teacher, that brought excitement to me to hear that that's what I was doing every time I had kids exercise in my phys ed class. And the opportunity came to me the following year when my principal said, we have created a literacy class, and that was a class that was going to be for students who were coming to our high school reading below grade level. And we had had some success with it the year before, but we had some parents who complained that their students didn't get to take an elective in their freshman year. So he said, would you consider running a 0-hour PE class, a PE class before school started? And that's because at Naperville Central High School, every student takes daily physical education. So that's on their schedule no matter what they're doing. And so in order to fit in an extra class, it required the kids to come before school. So there were 16 students involved in the literacy class the first year, and we gave them the option about coming in before school and taking their phys ed class and getting it out of the way. And the people involved in the program, I said, this is exciting. I've learned some information from a neuroscientist, John Rady. I'd like to see if we can make application with this particular class. And so we kept data, and we had, out of the 16 students, we had 7 students who opted to just go to the literacy class first period coming off the bus, and 9 students chose to come to the 0-hour PE class. And when we collected data at the end of the first semester, using a nationwide reading test, we discovered that the students who had PE before improved half a year more than the other students involved in the reading class. So we knew we were onto something, and that was kind of the way it started that first year.
That's very exciting. Did you get immediate positive feedback from your administration, or was that a long-term project? Did you have to gain confidence from them? What led, do you think, the administration to really embrace the program?
It probably took the second year of the program. And so the administration was initially excited by the results. And so for the second year of the program, they said, all right, every student who is going to have this literacy class. We're going to start their day off. We're not going to give them an option. We're going to start their day off with first period physical education. So now the class name changed. We changed it from zero LRPE, since it wasn't meeting before school, to Learning Readiness PE. We were getting the students ready to learn. And there were two sections of the reading class that particular year. So I said, let's take the study and let's stretch it a bit. Let's put one of those classes second hour, immediately after the Learning Readiness PE class, and we'll put the other one at the end of the day, eighth hour. So there's a disconnect from when they exercised to when they had the class. And when we kept data again at the end of the first semester, we saw the same kinds of results as we had seen the year before. Almost a half a year more reading improvement in those students who had it second period as opposed to those students who had it eighth period. And so now we knew conclusively that putting a phys ed class or an exercise period prior to classes that kids struggled in, they did better, because in the second year we paired it also with a mathematics class, and so we created a third-hour mathematics class, and we kept the data, and we saw the same kinds of results in mathematics, only even more dramatic improvements in those kids who had that PE class 2 periods before.
So, Paul, do you think then, when we're talking about peak performance on our website, one of the focuses is helping people in their lives deliver peak performance in their professions and their relationships and whatever. In an educational setting, helping kids become, or students become, more ready to learn using physical activity is an exciting evolution, I think. It is something that you would think would be embraced by administrators in particular, who are looking at improving academic performance and at the same time dealing with the broader issues of childhood obesity and inactivity. What are the challenges you see in that approach, or do you see that being the way forward for physical education in the future?
Well, I think there's two issues here. The first is that physical education needs to change its emphasis. It needs to move away from what I call the sports model of physical education, where so much emphasis is placed on teaching skills in sports activities, to more of a fitness, health, wellness-based model, where the emphasis is on student improvement in terms of health. It's about giving students the opportunity to make sure that they're very active in class. And that doesn't mean we're going to eliminate sports altogether in physical education. We just make some adaptations, and something like if you're going to play soccer in a phys ed class and you're going to teach the skills, then when the students play, they don't play in an 11-on-11 scenario. They play 4 against 4, so that all of the students are more active, they're more involved, they're more engaged, and they're getting, in essence, a better workout as a result of being in that class. But again, that's the emphasis. The emphasis needs to be on the fitness, health, and wellness. The other big issue always is scheduling. When you want to tie in particular classes with a phys ed program like this, scheduling those students is a difficult situation. In our case, we have a 3,000 student population, and to hand schedule some of those students who are struggling in school, that's time intensive, and to make sure that you schedule that throughout the day. But those are the big issues. Is first and foremost, the emphasis of physical education needs to change.
Right. When did you, when we think about people who are innovators, and you may not put yourself in that category. I think, based on people that I know in this industry and people I've talked to, they certainly respect what you've been able to accomplish there. It's been a big deal, really. And you really are setting a blueprint example for teachers around the country, and I think it's very inspiring. But Who was a big influence on your success as, as you were, how did you get into physical education? What was the driving force for that? And who do you attribute, where you are now in physical education? What was some of the driving forces behind that?
Well, first of all, thanks for all the kind words, John. I think I'm just a person that happens to have been lucky to be in the right place at the right time in some cases. Initially, I went to college to major in sociology. I wanted to be a social worker. And I ran into a college soccer coach who inspired me. And it was him, his name was Roger Francor, who happened to be the coach of our soccer team at the time, inspired me to become a physical education teacher. So 40 plus years ago, I made the switch and went into physical education. Then over time, I had the opportunity to go to a number of different schools to work. Started out in a private school, then I went to a larger public school, and finally, the last 26 years, I ended up at Naperville Central. When I was hired at Naperville Central, I was hired as a physical education teacher and as a coach, and suddenly the gentleman who was the athletic director at the time happened to be our department chair, and the job just became too daunting. Being an athletic director, department chair for physical education, health, and driver ed, and the district decided to create a department chair then for just physical education, health, and driver ed. I applied for it, and I was fortunate enough to get it. Then in our school district at the time, there was a gentleman named Phil Lawler, who I mentioned earlier, and he happened to be the district coordinator for physical education. And he was teaching at the middle school level, and his middle school fed into my high school. And I respected Phil, and we would often spend time talking philosophy. What were we doing in physical education? Was it beneficial? That's the time when we looked around and we saw that, one, schools all over the country were dropping physical education. They saw really no benefit in it. At the same time, childhood obesity was starting to become an issue. We started to understand that we needed to step up and take some responsibility for what was happening in our culture. So we started to change the emphasis of physical education in the Naperville School District. Phil was a coach, I was a coach, we were both very competitive, so if he would go and try something at the junior high, then I would have to try and one-up him, as he told me about his success, and then I would have to try and one-up him, and I would tell him about my success. And as a result, both of our programs just continued to grow and change and become what I would call, or what Phil called, the new PE. And that was exciting. It was exciting to be at that particular stage of my career, leading my department, leading actually the district into this new stage of what physical education should look like. Phil,
you know what?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just saying that people who do not know about Naperville School District and the incredible physical education program that is there, you're the first school district really to have in essence, a gym that was more like a fitness center than just a regular gym, and that was a unique application. You have a lot of equipment there that you would find in a normal fitness facility that kids come in and use. You explored an innovative use of technology in your programs. You want to talk a little bit about that and how you were able to get some of that equipment into the gym?
Oh, sure. If you're going to change your phys ed program to a fitness, health, and wellness-based program, then obviously you need to create a facility that's going to teach students how to take care of themselves as they go forward into the future. And when you looked around, you saw just a gut of these fitness centers opening up all over the place. So you knew you had to create classes and a curriculum that taught kids how to exercise properly, and that type of thing. So we found out about heart rate monitors. Again, being in the right place at the right time. Phil had mentioned that he had heard about a middle school teacher in a small town in Iowa. Phil initially was from Iowa, and his family, coming from a small town in Iowa, knew about this phys ed teacher who was using heart rate monitors. Her name was Beth Kirpatrick. And I told Phil, what is it, somebody from a small town in Iowa going to tell us from a major metropolitan area of Chicago about technology and physical education? Well, obviously I was wrong and Phil was right. Beth came in and introduced us to heart rate monitors, and we started to understand what they could do. Phil got the first heart rate monitor in our district, discovered wonderful things about kids that we just assumed we knew. I mean, his big epiphany came when he had a young girl in his class who was running mile run and would finish just out of breath and everything, but could never meet the standard of what was considered fit. So Phil kept saying, well, you need to run faster, like most of us phys ed teachers would do. And she said, but I'm trying my hardest. So with a heart rate monitor, Phil put a monitor on her, found that, in fact, she was running harder and out of her training heart rate zone, more so than any other kid in her class. So, yes, she was working to peak capacity for herself, even though she couldn't meet the standard for being, quote, in the healthy category for running the mile. An eye-opening experience for us. So that's when we started moving into the direction of trying to convince our administration that we needed heart rate monitors. In the meantime, I was raising money any way I could to try and buy heart rate monitors, because it took our district almost 3 years to decide that they wanted to finally fund heart rate monitors. And by the time they said, okay, we're ready to go, you can have your heart rate monitors, I said, fine, I don't want them, and I wanted this fitness testing system called the TriFit. And I know you're familiar with that, John, because you're the one that sold it to us. I said, I want this instead. And they said, what's that? And I explained to them that we could track kids' fitness levels over time, which I thought was important. And they said, well, we've got to see it. So I asked you and the creators of the program to come in and talk to our administration. And they said, okay, well, the money we were going to spend on heart rate monitors at your school, we'll buy this TriFit system. But they said, now, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't do what you want it to do, know that you'll never get your heart rate monitors. I said, well, I'll take that chance. That's okay. And so here I had one system, one station to test 2,600 students. I said, now, how am I going to do this? And what I did is I brought in mothers, and I trained them how to use the system. It wasn't rocket science. It was just a piece of technology, and you could train people how to use it. And here the mothers were testing the students using the system, and they were doing blood pressure testing and body composition testing and keeping track of their fitness data. And every time an administrator would walk by, I would grab them and then say, here, come here, look at what these mothers are doing. And, well, the mothers raved about it. And before I knew it, the district was buying TriFits for all of the junior highs, all of the high schools, and eventually we got portable systems for every elementary school as well, so that we could track data on a K-12 basis. And so that was exciting. And then they said, oh, by the way, we'll find enough money to see that you get your heart rate monitors for your school to boot. So
you were able to prove your program. It involved the administration in the process. You kept them informed on a regular basis. That was an important part of this dynamic, I would imagine.
That was an important part, but I think what sold it more was the parents. If you convince the parents that you're doing something good for their students, then all of a sudden they become advocates for yourself. And so one of the things Phil and I found over years is on our opening days, when you have those early school parent meetings where the parents come in and they go through the schedule of what their kids did, well, we never spent time talking about, dressing and the rules and regulations of our PE class and whatnot. We spent time explaining to the parents the benefits we were going to give to their students. We weren't going to improve their free throw accuracy. We were going to improve their health and wellness and fitness levels. Now that then caught the parents and said, whoa, that makes sense. I mean, what parent doesn't want their kids to be healthy? So all of a sudden, we weren't just a poor stepsister out there saying, oh, that's just a period for kids to have a break during the day, or more importantly at the elementary level, a period during the day that the academic teachers can have a break. We'll just send them to the gym. And so all of a sudden there was a value in the community to our phys ed program, and it still remains a value to the community. I mean, there's lots of support for physical education in our community.
That's fantastic. One of the exciting things that you folks have done, it's an innovative approach, is to take physical activity, the right kind of physical activity, into the classrooms of all teachers to help them, work with their kids to kind of reset the brain so that they're more focused in class. And I would imagine this might help with class management issues as well. Do you see that as a possibility, or what is the role of physical activity or the physicality, perhaps, of actions and movement within the classroom?
Good question, John. When you do a study of the brain and neuroscience and humanity, you know that we are a biped species by nature. In other words, we walked on 2 feet, so it allowed us to use our hands, and that's how we discovered and learned things as we became more human. And what happened then is as we kept evolving and kept learning, we kept moving. And this is how the mind works. It works as a result of experimentation, not of sitting down and listening to lectures that in some cases are very boring, and we've all gone through that as we've gone through school. And so as I became more aware of neuroscience, I found out that any time you get a workout in, for example, you get this release of a couple of chemicals in your brain called neurotransmitters, which are responsible for the flow of information in your brain. And so that when you create dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, you're affecting the mind to begin with. You're allowing for students to become more attentive. Their self-esteem is raised. They have a sense of accomplishment. Well, we brought this concept then to our classroom teachers and said, look, once we get these minds in motion in our phys ed class, you need to keep them in motion in your academic classes. And it started to make some sense as I got a few champions, and especially in my math department. I got a couple of champions in my math department, and they ended up writing a couple of brain break books, and started using brain breaks after about 20 minutes in class time. And what they found is about 20 minutes in, the brains start to shut down and they start to wander. So you need to re-engage the students with some movement or some activity. Sometimes it's related to the subject matter, sometimes it isn't. And found that with that re-energizing the brain a little bit, the next 20 or so minutes after that, the students were refocused again. And so that became exciting. Well, then that expanded even more, and they started to use movement in the learning process as well. So instead of passing papers out, they would be placed around the room, and students had to get up out of the desks and move around and find those papers. Or they would, another example would be if they were doing peer reviews of compositions, for example. In the old days, the students sitting in rows would pass papers back to their peers, and they would peer review them for a while, and the teacher would say stop, and they would pass the papers back, and they would do that. Well, instead of doing that, put the papers in a circle on desks and start playing music, play musical chairs. When the music stops, you sit down, and that's the paper you're reviewing. When the music starts, you get up again, you move around, and you can do peer review that way. And so you're just allowing movement. You're allowing the brain to function.
Very interesting. Very interesting. One of the things that's exciting about this, working with students in young age, is something that can be extrapolated into the adulthood as well. So we could have situations, I think, in companies and in businesses and a lot of work environments where we're sitting for a long period of time. We can adapt this to the workplace so that we can be more productive. And when we're talking about peak performance, use this as a strategy to help deliver peak performance in your job or whatever life event you're doing. So I think there's some real correlations there between what you're doing in the school and what people in the workplace can do.
Well, I couldn't agree more. A friend of mine has a wife who works for Google, and if they have a meeting, they'll never have a meeting sitting down. Their meetings will never last more than 20 minutes, and if their group is small enough, their meeting will be done while they're walking. So we need to learn. We need to learn from the brightest and the best companies in the world, and we're more and more companies are finding this is important. They're changing their work environments. They're giving some of their workers what we call walk stations, where they're putting a desk over a treadmill, so people can get on a treadmill and walk short distance, or slower speed, about 1 mile an hour, and they can do their emails and talk on the telephone and become much more constructive in their work environment. And then not only that, it has an effect on the health and wellness of their employees as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I would imagine in geriatric situations, people who are elderly, getting them more physically active, that mind-body connection, keeping them sharper, perhaps helping deal with things like dementia and Alzheimer's might be a place where, the strategic use of physical activity could be very effective. So taking the similar experiences you've had in the classroom and working with elderly people might be beneficial as well.
Yeah, if you do the research, that's what they're doing with the aging population. In the old days, to prevent dementia, they would have you do crossword puzzles and balance your checkbook and do mathematical problems. Well, they're still doing that. The only difference is they're preceding that activity with a walk. And so when you build the new brain cells as a result of cardiovascular exercise, even when it's just a walk, then those brain cells become enhanced when you challenge them with either new learnings or puzzles. And so that's what we're seeing in the world. That's the latest venture in trying to help dementia.
One of the things that's a big topic today, of course, and teachers are dealing with on a regular basis, I think, is dealing with special needs kids, have situations with ADHD, and trying to have them in the classroom and dealing with these kids in an effective way. I think it must have been frustrating for teachers trying to get some of these kids to try to sit down and be quiet, which is just not, what they're programmed to be like. Can physical activity with those kids help them learn better, do you think?
Absolutely. Remember, I talked about those neurotransmitters, specifically dopamine and norepinephrine. When you mix those two neurochemicals together, you're creating what is nothing more than Adderall or Ritalin in the brain. Adderall and Ritalin is nothing more than a combination of the two chemicals of dopamine and norepinephrine. And so, yes, if you get kids exercising prior to sitting in a class, you're giving them a dose of Ritalin and Adderall that allows them to be more attentive. The best part about it is it's developed in our brains in a natural combination as opposed to a pharmaceutical combination, and they're getting the right amount of doses. See, when doctors are prescribing Adderall and Ritalin, they're always fooling around with how much dopamine they need, how much more norepinephrine they need, and until they get that balance right. Meantime, sometimes we're teaching kids who are sitting in desks like zombies. Yeah, they're not fidgeting and they're not moving around, but at the same time, when sometimes you stare into their faces, you get this blank stare back. Right.
Have you seen the use of things like stand-up desks in classrooms where people can be moving their feet or steps? Is that something that you think is something that might be embraced in the future on a more consistent basis in schools?
Well, I certainly hope so. I know we've incorporated them in our school system. We were very fortunate. Our community passed a multi-million-dollar renovation building fund for our aging high school. Our high school was built in the 1950s. Well, in 2010 and beyond, we weren't weren't able to do all of the things educationally that we needed to do for the changing environment. A lot of that was technology, computers in the classroom and things like that. So in this renovation, we changed our furniture. And so any chance we could, we changed the traditional student seat where they're locked in, and we gave them chairs that were on wheels that they could roll around, and the seat would you could lean back, you can lean forward, you could lean side to side, and it was adjustable on the hydraulics because not every student is the same height. We changed our desks so that they were we could move them closer together, and then we put in stand-up desks. We also found early on in our studies with some of our students who struggled, we put them on exercise balls, and then they could just bounce. When they got fidgety, they could just bounce up and down rather than reaching over and slapping the head of the student next to them. So we found that effective. The only problem, unfortunately, for us at the high school level is that we found students driving pens and pencils into them and deflating them. So that's why we went with a high-tech chair instead.
Did the teachers who, in the classrooms that you put these things in, how did those teachers, did they embrace that, or did you have a hard time convincing them that you should allow kids to be more physically moving, more active during the learning process? But that's something that was embraced by teachers?
No, they were very skeptical at first. You have to remember in colleges they teach you about teaching with control and never losing control and always keeping the students under wraps, so to speak. And so yeah, they were skeptical. Getting the students out of their seats was foreign for them. I mean, for us as phys ed teachers, we wanted our kids up and around and running and being, like madmen sometimes. In a classroom, it was difficult for some of them to let go. It still is difficult. Out of the almost 370 teachers at the high school level in our particular school, not all of them get their kids out of the desk. And it's interesting because one of the math teachers who wrote one of the brain break books, he shadowed one of his students. He got permission, and he just went to every class that student went to through a day. And when he got into a classroom that had the traditional desks, he felt locked in because when he teaches, he's moving around, he's standing up. He doesn't have a teacher's desk in front of the classroom. His classroom doesn't look like the traditional classroom where, I'm the teacher, I'm the sage on stage. And so he felt locked in. When he was sitting there for long periods of time, each class being 50 minutes, oftentimes his mind drifted while he was listening to what was going on in the class. He became more hungry. And, if you go back to Maslow's law of hierarchy of needs, if you're hungry, you can't, you're focused on that, you can't concentrate on what's being held in the classroom. Again, if you get kids up and moving, when you take, again, the combination of dopamine and serotonin, that helps you with suppression of appetite. So now, by incorporating movement in the classroom, kids aren't thinking about being hungry anymore. They're not focused on, my stomach is growling. And so they're more focused on the task at hand. So there's lots of advantages to this type of teaching. We need to move away from the instructional model of education, putting kids in 4 rows of 5 desks. You see, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle didn't teach their kids in Athens sitting on 4 rows of 5 rocks. They got up and experienced life and moved through the streets of Athens.
Very well said. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate your time. I think this is going to provide some unique insight into some of these new innovative approaches to using physical activity to learn, and hopefully we can take from this some ideas for our own personal lives and relate it to how we function in our daily workplace. I know, for example, that I have a home office, and quite often I get locked into sitting in front of the computer for 5 or 6 hours, and it's really important to get up and move and to be, at my best, I need to be more physical in my activities. I've actually started doing stand-up desk type of activities as well, and I think that everybody can learn from this. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And if people want to get a hold of you or find out a bit more about your program, what would you suggest?
I suggest that they go to our website. It's called www.learningreadinesspe.com. And they'll see all kinds of videos on there. They'll see our data from our literacy class and our mathematics class, and they can know then how to get a hold of me from our website.
Well, great. Have a great day, Paul, and I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future.